I found the hotel receipt in his jacket pocket on our 5th anniversary. While my husband was building a lie, someone else was showing me what honesty felt like. Now I'm standing at a crossroads I never imagined, and the choice I make tonight will destroy someone I love. If you've ever felt torn between what's safe and what's real, stay with me. This is my story, raw, messy, and still unfolding. Hit that like button if you're ready for the truth, and stick around because you won't believe where this goes. It was supposed to be perfect. Richard had made reservations at the restaurant where he proposed 5 years earlier. I wore the blue dress he loved, the one he said made my eyes look like the ocean. I remember feeling grateful, grateful that after all the long hours he'd been working, all those late nights at the pharmaceutical company, he still wanted to celebrate us. I offered to pick up his suit from the dry cleaners that afternoon. That's when I found it. A receipt from the Grandview Hotel, dated 3 weeks earlier. Room service for 2. A bottle of champagne I've never tasted. My hands shook as I stood there in our bedroom, this small piece of paper turning my entire world into a question mark. The worst part? I wasn't even surprised. Not really. There'd been signs for months. The way he'd started showering as soon as he got home, how his phone was suddenly always face down, the perfume on his collar that smelled nothing like the vanilla I always wore. I'd been pushing those thoughts away, telling myself I was being paranoid, insecure, dramatic. But your gut always knows, doesn't it? Your gut knows before your heart is ready to accept it. That night at dinner, I watched him across the candlelit table, laughing, holding my hand, telling me I was beautiful, and I felt nothing. Just this vast, empty nothing where love used to be. I didn't confront him. I smiled, ate my food, came home, and made love to a stranger who wore my husband's face. Then I lay awake until sunrise, staring at the ceiling, wondering who I'd become. The next 2 weeks were torture. I started noticing everything, how he'd step outside to take certain calls, how he'd come home at midnight on a Tuesday, claiming a client dinner ran late, but his breath didn't smell like food. I became someone I hated, checking his pockets, scrolling through phone records, playing detective in my own marriage. Each new piece of evidence was a small death, killing the version of us I'd believed in. I threw myself into work. I'm an art restoration specialist at the Hartwell Museum, and honestly, there's something poetic about my job, taking broken, damaged things and trying to make them whole again. If only marriages came with the same instruction manual as a 16th century painting. That's when everything got complicated. The museum director called me into her office on a Wednesday morning. We'd been selected to restore a private collection, 12 classical paintings that hadn't been publicly viewed in 40 years. The owner wanted to donate them to the museum but needed them restored first. It was the biggest project of my career, the kind of opportunity I'd dreamed about since graduate school. The owner was Vincent Castellano, a classical pianist and music professor at the university, mid-40s with gray threading through his dark hair, and these incredibly sad eyes that seemed to notice everything. Our first meeting was purely professional. He walked me through his collection, explaining the history of each piece, how his late father had acquired them, what they meant to his family. But here's the thing about Vincent. He was present. Completely, utterly present in a way I'd forgotten people could be. When I spoke, he listened. Not the half-listening Richard did while checking his phone, but real listening, where you can tell someone is actually hearing your words and thinking about them. Our meetings became weekly. I'd update him on the restoration progress, and we'd stand in his music room surrounded by paintings and the rich smell of old wood and linseed oil. Conversations that started about art restoration techniques somehow drifted into philosophy, into childhood memories, into the dreams we'd had before life reshaped us. I learned he'd been married once, divorced 8 years ago, no children. She'd left him for someone more ambitious, someone who wanted more than a professor's salary and quiet evenings at home. I never meant to tell him about Richard. It just happened. One afternoon, I'd found another hotel receipt that morning, a different hotel this time, and when Vincent asked if I was all right, something in me just broke. I started crying, right there in his music room, tears falling onto the canvas I'd been working on. And he didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer meaningless platitudes or tell me it would be okay. He just handed me his handkerchief and sat quietly beside me until I could breathe again. That was the first time he touched me. Just his hand on my shoulder, warm and steady. But I felt it everywhere, like electricity running through water. I pulled away quickly, mumbled an apology, packed up my supplies, and practically ran to my car. That night, I told Richard I needed to visit my sister for the weekend. I couldn't look at either of them, my cheating husband or this man who was making me feel things I had no right to feel. I sent my assistant to the next 3 meetings. I told myself I was being professional, maintaining boundaries, doing the right thing. But Vincent saw through it. He showed up at the museum on a Thursday afternoon, carrying coffee and looking concerned. "You don't have to avoid me," he said simply. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." We sat on a bench in the sculpture garden, and I told him everything. About finding the receipt, about the lies, about feeling like I was living with a ghost of my marriage. And then Vincent said something that changed everything. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." 5 years of marriage, and Richard had never looked at me the way Vincent did in that moment. Like I was art worth studying, music worth learning, something precious and complex and beautiful. When he kissed me, I didn't pull away. I kissed him back, and for 30 perfect seconds, nothing else existed. Then reality crashed in like cold water. I pushed him away, horrified. What was I doing? I was becoming the same thing I hated Richard for being. A cheater. A liar. Someone who destroyed vows and broke promises. But I didn't stop seeing Vincent. God help me, I didn't stop. The next month was like living in a fever dream. At home, Richard was trying. He'd admitted to the affair after I finally confronted him, tears streaming down his face, begging for forgiveness. Her name was Bethany. She worked in his office. It had been going on for 7 months. He swore it was over, swore it meant nothing, swore he'd do anything to save our marriage. We started couples therapy. He brought me flowers every Friday. He'd hold me at night and whisper apologies into my hair. And part of me wanted to forgive him. Part of me remembered the man I'd married, the one who'd made me laugh until my stomach hurt, who'd held my hand through my father's funeral, who'd once driven 3 hours in a snowstorm because I was sick and craving my grandmother's soup. But then Vincent would text, and my heart would race in a way it hadn't in years. We met in secret, coffee shops in other neighborhoods, a park across town, once in his car parked by the lake. We'd talk for hours, and yes, we'd kiss. We never went further than that, but the emotional intimacy was deeper than anything physical I'd shared with Richard in years. Vincent knew my fears, my dreams, the version of myself I'd buried to be a good wife. With him, I wasn't performing or pretending. I was just myself, raw and real, and finally seen. I was living 2 lives, lying to everyone, including myself. I told Richard I was working late when I was with Vincent. I told Vincent that I needed time to think, when really I was having good days with my husband, days when I could almost glimpse a path back to us. I was cheating and being cheated on, victim and villain all at once. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then everything came to a head in the same terrible week. Richard's mother called on a Monday. Cancer, stage 3. The prognosis was uncertain, but the family needed to stay united, stay strong. Richard was devastated. His mother had always been his anchor, the steady presence in his life, and he needed me, really needed me. That night he held me and cried, and I held him back, feeling the weight of our shared history, all the moments good and bad that had woven our lives together. On Wednesday, he suggested we renew our vows. "A fresh start," he said. "Let everything that happened be in the past. Show his mother that we're strong, that family means something." The hope in his eyes nearly broke me. On Friday, Vincent's orchestra offered him first chair in Vienna. A dream position, the kind musicians spend lifetimes hoping for. He asked me to come with him. Leave Richard, leave my job, start over in a city where no one knew us, where we could build something real and honest from the beginning. Both men wanted an answer within a week. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I'd stand in front of my closet in the morning, unable to decide what to wear because I couldn't decide who I was anymore. Was I Richard's wife, the woman who believed in second chances and the sanctity of vows? Or was I the woman who'd fallen for Vincent, who wanted passion and presence and the chance to be truly known? This wasn't a choice between good and bad. That would have been easier. This was a choice between two different futures, two different versions of myself. If I stayed with Richard, I'd be choosing forgiveness, choosing our history, choosing to believe people can change. But I'd also be choosing to live with the ghost of his betrayal, wondering if I could ever truly trust him again, if I was staying out of love or just fear of starting over. If I chose Vincent, I'd be choosing passion, choosing honesty, choosing someone who saw me clearly and loved what he saw, but I'd also be choosing to become the person who gave up on her marriage, who ran away when things got hard, who broke vows in front of God and family. I visited my grandmother. She's the only person I told everything, the whole messy truth. She's 87 now, sharp as ever, and she listened without interrupting while I poured out my heart at her kitchen table. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she told me about my grandfather, how he'd had an affair when she was 35, how she'd found out and nearly left. But she stayed. They worked through it, and they were married for 43 years before he passed. She said she didn't regret staying, that they'd had beautiful years together, that forgiveness had been its own kind of freedom. But then she said something I didn't expect. I don't regret staying, but I wonder sometimes about the life I didn't choose. There was a man, before your grandfather, who wanted to marry me. I said no because I thought I should want someone more ambitious, more exciting. But he was kind, he was steady, and sometimes I wonder who I would have been with him. She took my hand. Only you know what you can live with, sweetheart. But don't choose out of fear. Don't choose because you're afraid of what people will think, or because you're afraid of being alone, or because you're afraid of making a mistake. Choose out of truth. Choose the life you can wake up in 10 years from now and not resent. That night, I sat alone in the museum after everyone had gone home. I walked through the galleries, surrounded by restored paintings, pieces that had survived centuries of damage and neglect. Some had been restored so well you'd never know they'd been broken. Others still showed their scars, the cracks and repairs visible if you looked closely enough. I thought about restoration. Sometimes you can repair damage and make something stronger. Sometimes the breaks are too deep, and no amount of skill can make it whole again. Sometimes starting fresh is the only honest option. I made my decision. I called Richard and asked him to meet me at home. When he arrived, I was sitting in our living room with my wedding album open on my lap. I looked at the girl in those photos, 26 years old and so sure that love was enough. So naive about how complicated people could be, how marriage was a choice you had to make over and over, not just once at an altar. I told him I was leaving. The sound he made was something between a sob and a gasp. He dropped to his knees in front of me, begging, promising, pleading. But I'd made my choice, and for the first time in months, I felt clear. I explained that I couldn't rebuild trust on a foundation that had been shattered. That I'd tried, God knows I'd tried, but every time he touched me, I thought about her. Every time he said he loved me, I wondered if they were the same words he'd said to Bethany. I told him I'd stay through his mother's treatment, that I wouldn't abandon his family during a crisis. But our marriage was over. I'd file for divorce after the new year. I didn't tell him about Vincent. That felt cruel and unnecessary. Let him think I was just a wife who couldn't forgive. He didn't need to know I'd betrayed him too, that I'd found something with someone else that made me realize what I'd been missing. Then I called Vincent and told him I couldn't come to Vienna. His silence on the other end of the line lasted forever. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. He said he understood, that he'd known it was a long shot, that he hoped I'd find happiness. I told him he'd shown me what it felt like to be truly seen, and I'd always be grateful for that. But I couldn't leave my life for a maybe, couldn't build a future on the ashes of someone else's pain. We both cried. We said goodbye. I never saw him again. Here's the thing nobody tells you about making impossible choices. You don't get closure. You don't get a neat ending where everything works out and you know for certain you did the right thing. You just get the aftermath, the reality of living with what you've chosen. I moved into my own apartment in January. Richard's mother went into remission in March, thank God. The divorce was finalized in June. Richard sent flowers on what would have been our 6th anniversary with a card that said, "I'll always love the girl you were." I cried for an hour, then threw them away. I heard through a colleague that Vincent took the Vienna position. I looked him up once, found a video of him performing with the orchestra. He looked the same but different, happier maybe, or just moved on. I closed the browser and haven't looked since. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my small apartment that's finally starting to feel like home. I've adopted a cat named Monet. I've taken up pottery. I've gone on exactly 3 dates, all disasters, and I'm okay with that. I'm learning who I am when I'm not someone's wife or someone's almost lover. Just myself, alone with my choices and their consequences. Some nights I wonder about the other paths. If I'd stayed with Richard, would we have made it work? Would his mother's illness have brought us closer? Would time have healed the wound of his betrayal? If I'd gone to Vienna with Vincent, would we have built something lasting, or would the guilt have poisoned it eventually? I don't know. I'll never know. But here's what I learned standing at that crossroad. There are no clean choices when hearts are involved, only honest ones. I chose myself. Not Richard's version of me or Vincent's version of me, but the woman I needed to become. The one who knows her worth, who won't settle for half-truths or half-love, who'd rather be alone than lost in someone else's life. Was it the right choice? Ask me tomorrow, and I might give you a different answer. But today, right now, it's the choice I can live with. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for. Not perfection, not certainty, just the courage to choose truth over comfort and to live with the beautiful, terrible freedom that comes after. I still don't know if I made the right choice. Some days I'm sure. Other days I wake up wondering about the other path. But here's what I learned. There are no clean choices when hearts are involved. Only honest ones. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever stood at an impossible crossroad, leave a comment below. I read every single one. Hit subscribe because next week I'm sharing what happened when I ran into the person I didn't choose, and you won't believe what they said. And please, hit that like button. It helps more people find these real stories. Thank you for listening without judgment. See you next time.